I am going to do my best to explain EPIC on a very high level because I can't do it justice. Basically, on the highest level, this is a technology that treats the brain. And it's located here in Reno, and it is one of the most groundbreaking things I've ever come across in my life. And so I really wanted to make sure to highlight this first. So first, I'm going to introduce you to the founder, Dr. Jin. I'm going to go down and make the introduction really quick, and then we'll come back. But first, hello, Dr. Jin is the founder of EPIC, or of the EMBP. And then we've got Jeff, who is a neurotechnician with EPIC. And then we've got Yolanda, who is the mother of a patient. Then we've got Sean, who is the father of a patient. Then we have Wendy, who is a patient herself. And then we're going to talk to Mike, who was also a patient himself. So you're going to get a lot of different perspectives here and a lot of really interesting information. So I'm less interesting to talk to than Dr. Jin. So let's start with you, Dr. Jin. First, will you do me a favor and tell us your background?
Well, I happen to be a psychiatrist to start with, and quickly I turned myself into an anti-psychiatry psychiatrist. I believe I know something about psychiatry in general, but I think they're approaching the wrong way, and then forget about the brain and constantly dealing with what the patients tell you. So that's why I'm going to change it.
I love it. And this technology that you invented it's using brain stimulation. So we talked a little bit about this ahead of time. So when a doctor is treating a heart or a ligament, they go and they look at the heart. But for some reason in our society, when someone has an issue that starts with their brain, we talk to them and we ask them how they feel. Tell us more about that.
That's the important issues. I think we need to talk about it. In medicine in general, every discipline you always have a little probe. For example, you have an EKG or at least a stethoscope. You can listen to your heart, listen to your lung, right? Every discipline except the psychiatry. So psychiatrists only listen to what you talk about it, and then they believe what you talk is your brain. But now we found that that's not true. Your brain doesn't care about you. So that if you don't take care of your brain, you will pay for it.
So for those of you, and I am really good at dumbing things down. That's why I'm a TEDx organizer. So they literally, as part of this treatment, they take an EEG of your brain. And it first tells you what's going on with your brain. So tell us the high level process first.
So EEG is a very sensitive machine to detect your trace amount of electric activity. And my previous work, which I worked for 30 years, and you can tell this little signal itself, just like a radio signal, that reflects so much about your brain, which includes your metabolic rates and also how you process information. So if you can really understand the EEG signal, you understand everything.
And like you were saying, in psychiatry and counseling and all of these different things, people are coming in and they're saying, I just feel depressed, I feel anxious. And so the doctor is just treating based on what the person is saying is going on. You actually look at their brain and you say, based on your research over the last 30 years, you can look at someone's brain and you can say, no, this is what's wrong.
That's right. So we don't follow the psychiatric diagnosis. We really only look at the brain. So sometimes I joke with my patients. I said, I don't care about you. I care about your brain because you are not your brain. Right? So that sometimes they come in with a diagnosis of depression. When I look at it, I go, no, you don't. Your brain doesn't fit any of these diagnoses. Sometimes we found the problem is in their heart. And we found a lot of people with arrhythmia in the cardiac issues and ended up with a severe anxiety, and a lot of other people with hypothyroidism, and they eventually turn out to be a depression. So that we have to look at our whole body, whole brain, instead of just focusing on their symptoms.
And then there's a lot of people who I've told about this and who have heard about this and say, oh, I've done this, I've heard about this, that's TMS. And there is another type of protocol called TMS that is not the same as what is being done here. Let's talk about that a little bit.
That's so true that just like you have a scalpel as a surgeon, but doesn't mean every surgeon do the same thing. So that we use a TMS machine But how you operate that TMS machine is a totally different story. So by the way, I was one of the pioneers in this country to use TMS. That was back in early 2000. And the time when we had a psychiatric meeting, and I was helping my friends from the NIH try to put the flyers in a big psychiatric meeting, expecting 200 people to attending that satellite meeting, but ended up with only 12. So that's how we started. The meeting I had is on a portion of you guys. Now, 30 years passed, and there are so many new developments, and I happen to be one branch, just sway away from the mainstream. And EMBP is a third version of my development, and the whole essence of that is based on your personalized signature, because every brain is different. And we deal with the brain only with the half of the hemisphere, or a brain with a severe deficit while they were born. So that everybody's different. And instead of using cookie cutter protocol as a TMS, and we personalize the treatment by recording your brainwave to start with, and then specifically set up the protocol that it can deal with it. So those are the one that I would say this is it is a TMS, but it is a personalized, individualized TMS protocol.
And I invited all of these people here to give you their personal stories of this. So the TMS, like he explained, when people are saying that they've already had that, everyone that goes into that office gets the same level of treatment, the same level of magnetic impulses. When you go to EMBP, you get an EEG of your brain, and then you get a protocol that is specialized for you. So now I want to switch over to Jeff. So Jeff is a neurotechnician that works at the Epic Brain Center that's here in Reno. And Jeff has an incredibly interesting background. He played for the NFL. He give us a little bit of your background, because I'm not going to do it justice. Let's start there.
Thank you. So I played a lot of football, fortunately or unfortunately. And I started to develop symptoms from hitting my head, right? Post-concussion syndrome, CTE. You may have heard of that, as it's a big deal now. And so I was the prototype for what CTE is without dying, right? They got to dissect your brain to diagnose you with CTE. So they started calling it post-concussion syndrome. And I had all the markings that came with it: late onset substance abuse disorder, anxiety, depression, mental fog, the typical things that we start to see when brain communication starts to falter. And mine faltered from hitting my head all the time, which is one of the ways that you can damage it. But also got diagnosed with a severe disease, or Crohn's disease, and had a total hip replacement. And so it introduced emotional trauma to my life. And so the two kinds of trauma is a lot of what we look at in terms of how does the communication start to get disrupted. And so I was not well. It's the easiest way to say it. I was addicted to pain medication, which I was naive to the powers of opioids. I didn't need them before, and I'm given a script because I have a hole in my colon, and I wasn't well from the post-concussion syndrome because I went the traditional route, primary care physician and medication.
And then how did you end up getting connected in with the technology?
I was homeless for a summer, slept at the University of Nevada, where I got a full ride football scholarship. I was on the run from probation because I was charged with 4 felonies for stealing for drugs. And I decided to turn myself in. I couldn't live that way anymore. And so I turned myself in, spent 7 months in jail, and that's where I got introduced to the technology. My attorney heard of Dr. Jen's, one of his iterations of the technology coming to town, and thought maybe this could help you. And I accepted. And so I got sentenced by a district court judge, Judge Hardy, Department 15, actually took the time to listen to the science. And he gave me a chance. And that was 6 years ago. And it changed my life. That's all I can say, is it changed my life. And I needed to be a part of it. And so coincidentally enough, they needed a new neurotech at the clinic. And so I applied and got the job. And now I'm here.
Tell us how it changed your life. But then I want to talk about the clinic, but tell us your experience.
So growing up, I was dyslexic, learning disabled on IEPs, all that sort of stuff. Didn't learn well. It was hard. Things were challenging. And so now when I went through treatment, it got rid of my anxiety, my depression, mental clarity, the opposite of mental fog, came into my life where my brain worked. I tell people, I'm not a shiny quarter, right? When my brain works the way it's supposed to, it's powerful. And so my brain functions now better than it's ever have. And I got a master's degree and a 4.0 in the midst of my misery. And so my memory is good. I have no anxiety, no depression. I sleep well, and joy was introduced back into my life because I had the energy to actually engage in life and build relationships with people that were important, that I was missing because I was just surviving. I always think of the cat shirt that he's hanging on that bar and it says, "Hang in there, baby." Yeah. And I tell people that a lot because that's how I lived for 10 years until I was exposed to the technology.
And I've been lucky enough to see it in action too. They do that first EEG, and then the doctors read the EEG, and you can see the different parts of the brain lit up and the different, I'm so not medical and technical, but you see the different waves and all of this stuff. You actually see it. Then they do the protocol, and then after the first 2 weeks, they do a second EEG, and you can literally see how the brain has changed. And then they do the second 2 weeks, and then the protocol changes based on the first 2 weeks. And then at the end of it's usually, I've seen it where it's been a month, but they've got other ones too. Then at the end, you actually see the change in your brain. So now let's talk about the clinic a little bit. You see all kinds of different disorders and people come in. Just list some off that you've seen.
Autism, substance use disorder, PTSD, post-concussion syndrome, TBI, anxiety, depression, clinical depression, I said anxiety.
Epilepsy.
Yeah, it is. It can treat seizures, but we have to be very careful.
Right.
Our clinic isn't staffed properly to deal with that kind of a case. There's other things involved, also bipolar. When we talk major diagnosis, schizoaffective disorder, they're a little different in terms of the staffing that needs to take place. So we typically don't see those kind of patients because we're not capable or to handle the severity of a seizure disorder patient. It can, but there's protocols in place that we don't currently employ to be able to handle that. But yeah, anxiety, depression, substance use disorder, post-concussion syndrome, PTSD, those are typically the big ones.
The absolutely mind-blowing thing about this is it's agnostic to what the disorder is. It doesn't care what you're going in there for. It doesn't care if you're going in for PTSD or addiction. It's going to fix the brain. That's what's so cool about this. So now we've told you our story about what the big picture is, but now I want to talk to some real patients that have gone through this. So Yolanda Ortega, your 16-year-old son was having some really serious issues. First, start there. Tell us what was going on.
Yeah, I'm going to try to be really mindful of sharing my experience and not my son's experience. So I would say, since he was a really young child, that I would describe him as being an open wound. He felt everything so incredibly deeply. It was almost like he saw things in a different way. He's a classical pianist, and I would say, a shutter would rattle if he played a certain key, and he would be like, "Stop! I can't handle that sound." And he was very much an overachiever, 4.0, phenomenal runner. He's running now in college, and terrified of ever doing anything wrong. He was afraid of breaking a rule, had to be perfect. Everything had to be just right. Didn't drink and didn't do any sort of drugs, but was obsessed with being sort of perfect and then feeling everything incredibly deeply. And that just sort of kept intensifying. He did have heart surgery when he was 5 years old. I think that he has some PTSD from that. I think he would tell you differently. But I think that was a traumatic event in his life that that made that more intense. So as he got older, and I think as he went through puberty and you have hormones kicking in, he started struggling more and more with a lot of social anxiety that he covered up really well. I think if you met him, you'd think he seems like the most well-adjusted, confident person ever. And that led to a couple of hospitalizations, mental health hospitalizations, and a series of meds, trying all sorts of different meds, and kept kind of getting worse. He started hurting himself, and there were many days I would pick the lock to get into his room and wasn't sure what I was going to find on the other side of the door. And he would tell me he stopped being able to run. He would, this is a kid that's run since he was very little, would run half a mile and tell me, I just feel like there's so much noise in my brain, I can't keep going. And so we didn't know what to try, ended up at Epic. And
How'd you get connected to Epic?
Closest family friends, Dr. G, who works with Epic. Rick is closest family friends that the boys and I have in town. And so we try to separate, I would say, our family relationship with them being providers. And there was a moment where they asked me, like, do you want to try, what Rick is doing? And so it was, in all honesty, a little bit of a Hail Mary pass, because I didn't think I could keep him alive any longer.
And so tell us what his experience was and how it impacted him. By the third treatment, if we want to be that specific, he would get very dysregulated. And so something small, seemingly small, could throw him off for days at a time. So after the third treatment, he spilled some chocolate milk on some white pants that he had on his way out the door. And he had become really fastidious about things being in perfect order. His clothes had to be a certain way. They had to be lined up a certain way. Everything had to be pressed correctly. He would run like a lint roller before he walked out the door. Spills a little bit of chocolate milk on his brand new white pants. And he'd been planning this outfit the whole day. And I was like, let me help you. Like, I freeze, because this is the kind of thing that can throw somebody off for the next 5 days. Could throw him off for a long time, and now he's not going to school, now he can't function. And so I'm helping him get it, kind of trying to take it off, sort of panicked. And he looks at me and he goes, what am I going to do? And just walked out the door. Wow.
And it was astonishing. And I think that day there were sort of 3 things that happened, and you don't want to make things up, right? Like, you don't want to see something that's not really there. And he did not want to talk about it. That there were that day, there were kind of 3 things I remember that happened, and that was one of them.
Wow. And then that was after 3 days. And then tell us more about after the 2 months or the month.
Yeah, my son is is skeptical. So I'll say that he would talk to Rick or Dr. G before and be like, it's not going to work for me. I don't think this can work. What if I'm not a candidate? Like, really perseverating about it and not sure if it was going to work. And I knew he didn't want to talk about it during the treatments. And he was very quiet, kind of quiet about it. But we go so like you said, they do 10 treatments, 2 weeks of treatments, go back for the follow-up. And we're sitting with Dr. G. I don't know to call you Dr. G or Rick. But Rick, we're sitting with Dr. Rick. And I could feel, Rick can tell you if this was his experience, but I could feel the tension leave the room when he saw the proof. Like, he felt something that I think he probably felt like I did. We were scared that another shoe was going to drop, right? You're so terrified to go back to that place. But when he saw the scans, you could kind of feel that he was like, okay, maybe this is real.
And then, so you could see the difference. That's what I was describing. You could see the difference. And now, how long has it been since his treatment, and how's he doing now?
2 years. So it's been 2 years. It'll be 2 years this September, where we went from him curled up in a fetal position in the closet, crying and begging me to let him die, to he's running on very close to a full ride at a Division I university. So he was able to start running again, and he's running incredibly well, broke some big records this spring, playing classical piano, played for, 75 people for his senior recital, still finished. He got He did get a B, his first B ever in calculus, AP calculus, and it was my proudest moment, I think, that he just rolled with getting a B, because that showed so much progress. Prior to that, that would have destroyed him. So really proud of the 1B that he got, and he's almost full ride for academics and running at a big fancy university.
Yeah.
I want to say too, though, as much as I appreciate Epic, is that I do want to give Eric credit, and you would probably say this too. He worked really, really hard in therapy and on all of the things he was learning and skills, and he was absolutely dedicated to going to bed at 9:00 p.m., improving the way he was eating. So there was work done on his part as well, and I don't ever want to minimize that.
Absolutely. Do you want to add something?
That's a great point. The patients do just as much work as the treatment does. I treated him for most of the time, and it's a chance for us to talk. I think it's the most beautiful thing. The job I have is I get to share my story with people, because I want them. I'm a high school teacher. I taught 15 years, and I love talking with people and helping. And so we can bring their walls down by sharing our story, and my story in particular. And we had some very real conversations in a very private room to help the processing begin as the communication improves. And that's not easy. 30 minutes, when you start to see that there's a lot of things that have hurt me or hurt a patient, that they have to start working through, and they make changes. And I think the hardest part about change is the effort someone has to put in to do it. And your son definitely did it. I mean, everyone here on this panel put the work in from what their role was to help us help them.
Thank you.
Can I comment on one thing?
Yeah.
I realized that Jeff became a psychiatrist and I'm taking his job.
Sean, let's switch to you.
Okay.
So Sean has an incredibly interesting story. His son is autistic, and he was just sharing with me the story of his experience. Will you first start with what you were dealing with before you found Epic, and both how it was affecting your son and how it was impacting your entire family?
Oh, absolutely. So first, I just give a little background. I've been married over 32 years to my better half, my wife, together 36, and we waited a little longer to start a family. And I have a 19-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter. And, you try to do everything right, get a foundation under yourselves before you make this big decision, And so we did, and my son is the one who has diagnosed at the age of 2 with severe autism. We had an emergency C-section when he was being born. I can't say that's what caused it, but just to give you context. So it started out with some crisis, and then about 1 year old or a little older, we start to see something was off. It was just not typical what we were seeing. And at 2 years of age, he got the diagnosis, and the first thing they tell you is early intervention, right? And they give you about 9, they probably give people more things now, but they gave us like 9 or 10 things options. And I was like, well, I get early intervention is great, I guess, depending on what you do, right? So then we have these options. We did end up choosing a cognitive developmental option, which I'm glad we did, which, really did help him. But he had severe meltdowns, the kind that torture, it's just like watching your son or your kid go through torture. And then, of course, the crisis of the parents. And you had to try to stay calm and cool. They could last 30 minutes. They could last an hour before he could regulate himself.
And how often? I'm sorry.
Yes.
How often were they happening a day?
He would have 5 or more a day for years. They could last that long. And, autism, I'm not going to generalize autism. It was so complicated. But in our case, to me, what it means is a lack of opportunities to guide your child. You just lose opportunities because they're not able to process in the moment. They'll run away because it's too much for them to process. overstimulation, auditory things, loud noises would set them off. And it's hard to watch your kid go through that. You know, I had a lot of really good people around me that taught me how to stay calm and cool with diaphragm breathing and all of that, because I had to show them I'm there for you. You know, even though I can't do anything about it, you feel helpless. You can't stop it, right? Could be on an airplane. Thank goodness we didn't stop doing things as a family. That was very important for us. And I didn't worry about what other people thought, you know, because people focus so much on symptoms and they call them behaviors sometimes, like he could control it. And he could not control it. That was his brain. You know, I know much more about it now. But since the treatments, you know, since we finished, it's almost been 2 years about, I would say, 5 meltdowns a day, severe, with a half an hour or longer. Now we have 1 to 3 a month that lasts like 1 or 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, where he might jump up and down and everything, and then he can get himself together. And this could be everything from a barking dog to a crying baby to a leaf blower, things that all bother us, but we can regulate and deal with it. He was not able to deal with it. And every time I heard any of those noises, my heart rate would go up. I probably have a version of PTSD. But since the treatments, my whole family it's been a profound change in our lives for the better.
And you had a story too about after a certain number of days, something that happened?
Yeah, so real quickly too, the first week, there was barking dogs. We stayed in a house out here in Reno, and big dogs, very loud barks, and I knew that would set off my son. And at the third treatment, all the rooms were on that side of the house where the dogs were just like maybe 10 feet away on the other side of the fence. And I knew he was going to have a meltdown. And I went back to the room real fast to try to help him. And he just had his fingers behind his ears, which he had often would do with. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he nodded. I couldn't believe it. I mean, that was the first one. The second one that I was mentioning, I'd always bring an air fryer. So we'd go to the store and bring stuff to cook in the air fryer. In the second week of treatments, it was probably number 6, I think. He comes up to me in the kitchen. I go, "Do you want some chicken?" And he nodded his head. I put the chicken in, and I should tell you, he was minimally verbal, or what they would say, nonverbal. And I put the chicken in the air fryer, and he goes, "There you go." I almost dropped, because he'd never said 3 words in a row in his life. And now he's reproducing more sounds. He's saying words. Thank you. So now we have opportunities back, and now we're just redoing stuff, and excitement is back. I feel like the parent, you know, when he was 1. So it's been just amazing.
And you even said today that there was a time you couldn't have come and been away for the evening.
That is absolutely true. So this was my responsibility because, you know, my wife is amazing, but it's really hard to get out of crisis when you get this diagnosis. And because I retired what I was doing, and I was going to do this full time, and I was the one that had to take care of him in these situations, sit next to him on the planes, you know, do all that kind of thing. And, you know, it was just a matter of that I had to make sure that, you know, when he would do this, that nothing would go wrong in our house. You know, I couldn't have him say, do something, maybe the worst he would do is maybe pull your hair or something like that. But that would be it's really stressful on a parent. So 2 years ago, I would not be able to take a trip by myself. I was only able to take 1 trip in the past, I don't know how many years, by myself. I had coverage, and just by luck, I was introduced to this treatment.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Sean. Wendy. So
Hi.
Wendy did this for herself. So you told me a lot about your story before we got up here. Please share with us as much as you're comfortable sharing about where you were before the treatment.
Well, I grew up in a military family, a lot of chaos and trauma, sexual abuse, moving around, drugs and alcohol in my family. And I started feeling not okay. I started self-medicating when I was about 12 with food first, and then it just progressed from there. I was never formally diagnosed, but I started using, drugs and alcohol, and I just never got any real help, so it progressed. And I ended up I got in also trouble with the law. I was in jail because of drug and alcohol use myself. But I had also I had a good, decent amount of recovery time where I sought out the help of doctors, psychiatrists, individual group therapy, 12-step programs. What else did I say? Oh, so I tried knitting, I tried beekeeping, I tried long distance running. Everything that I possibly could, I felt. I was desperate, suicidal. And then, like 3 years ago, I started being suicidal, I think, when I was 14. And, I'm now 55 going on 56. So it's been a hard life trying to fight this. But, 3 years ago, I think it was about 3 years ago, my cousin, who works with Dr. Jin, actually told me about this therapy, and that's how it's just a miracle that it's here in Reno.
And what was your experience from that first EEG to the second one to the third one?
I would say by the time I hit my third day of treatment, I felt so much relief. I realized that I had never had a really great night's sleep. I had never felt rested, but it was such relief. I couldn't believe that I had lived all these years of my life without knowing what it felt like to actually have a good sense of well-being.
And how are you? Well, first I want to hear, so when you actually could see the difference on the comparison, what did you feel like?
It was so incredible after everything that I went through and all the different things that I had tried to see the before and after. It was so validating. Right. You know what I mean? It was just like, okay, this is real. So, yeah.
Yeah, you had been white knuckling your way through life all that time, and you finally had something validating saying, no, there is actually something going on here.
Yes. It was incredible. Yeah, to see that.
And how are you now?
I am the most stable I have ever been in my entire life. And it's been over 18 months. So I think this February, it will be 2 years. So, but I do want to piggyback on what some of the other people have been saying about taking your part seriously about supporting, the circadian rhythm, going to sleep, getting the blue light, trying to take care of your body too. So that's really, really important to support this incredible treatment.
We promise to tell you what that means before the end. Thank you so much. And Mike, you've got a couple stories to tell us, but first let's start with just tell us your background. What did you do for a living, and what was going on with you?
So I was born in Reno. I've always been big into the community and helping people, and I just decided to become a police officer in 2000. And I just retired about a year and a half ago. And I just want to warn you guys, all these people got me kind of emotional. So like it was just getting worse on the way down. So I'm trying to keep it together. But anyhow, I was a Washoe County deputy sheriff for about, over 20 years, and things just build up.
And what was going on with you and this is really an interesting one because, you know, cops are often not the ones that are going to talk about their feelings. And Mike not only is sharing with us here, but his willingness to share has made a huge difference for Reno. So first, will you tell us what was going on with you that made you seek out the treatment in the first place?
So at first, I started noticing I was having a lot of memory issues. I couldn't remember why I walked into a room. I couldn't remember what I did a couple of days ago. I thought it was just getting old, you know, but I just noticed it was progressively getting worse. And then I had a couple of pretty traumatic events, finding out I was going to be forced to retire, and then finding out after that I was going to be divorced because I was retiring. And I just found myself super aggro all the time. Driving down the street, if I saw somebody that had a neck tattoo, I wanted to turn around and drive them off the road and beat them up. I would just get these huge rages inside my heart. And I was not sleeping at all. Every time I'd start to doze off, I'd have these terrible nightmares about like killing people or beating people up and stuff. And I was just like, this is not me. Like my entire life, I've been the goofy, fun, happy, like athletic guy. I was not the guy. I never picked a fight in my life. I was the guy that always stood in between the bully and my friends. You know, I never was like a mean, aggressive person. And I was just finding myself just always feeling aggressive and mad and depressed. And I just was like, there's something, I have to do something. And so I was trying to figure it out and looking around, and I happened to, through mutual friends, run into Darren, who's one of the owners of Epic. And he's like, you got to try this, you know? So I came in, and at first I was like, oh man, these guys are like skaters and jocks, and I don't know, dude. But they just took me in and made me feel like family. And so it made me feel really comfortable to try this out. And after my first couple of sessions, I had the first good night of sleep I had in years. It didn't have the nightmares. When I woke up, I thought, oh, I've only been asleep for a few minutes, and it had been all night. And so I was really excited.
And how have you been doing since then?
I've been doing awesome. I've had 3 sets of treatments. The first one just really set me on a good path. And then after that, I was like, I kind of felt like if it did that much for me the first time, I want to do it again, you know? And I felt much better. And now I just feel like I'm my old self again.
And you were instrumental in getting courts to start looking at this. Will you tell us that journey and about what Reno's doing here?
Sure. So one of the things that makes this kind of difficult for people to accept, or, you know, nobody likes change, especially big dumb meatheads like cops. And I just kind of was like, how can I explain this to these people so that they get it? Because I could see in their eyes they were fading when we were talking about it. And I could see, you know, we had a meeting with the sheriff and a couple of the city councilmen and some other important people. And, you know, we had Dr. Judy and different people talking. And I could just kind of see these guys getting their eyes glazing over, and they're like, whatever. And so the way I explain it to people is every time you experience a stressful or traumatic event, a little piece of your brain will focus on that forever because it's a protective mechanism and it's trying to protect you. So after years and years and years of traumatic, stressful events, whether it be fighting or whatever, so much of your brain is focused on those stressful, traumatic events that it starts taking away from your memory, from your normal type thinking. And then after a while, your brain is just like amped up and ready to fight everybody. And so what happened with me when I did the treatments with Epic is and what it does is it just resets your brain and it gets it back on that wavelength from when you were younger, you know? So it just basically reset my brain and I felt like my old self again.
But what did you do with the courts?
Oh, so that's how I explained it to them. I apologize, but that's how I explained it to them, and they were like, "Oh, okay, I get it now," you know. And I think it makes it easier when you're talking to people like that when it's coming from somebody like me who actually experienced the same things they experienced. So I just told them my story, and it went from there. It's kind of been like an avalanche of just positive experiences since then.
So this is huge that we're having courts now being willing to send people to this instead of sending them into a system that we're just perpetuating and making more talented criminals. Instead, now we're this is now in the courts, and now also in Washoe County. Now I want to come back to Dr. Jin, because first, before we talk about barriers, because I want to get into that, I want to talk about what's going on in Washoe County. Some things that were mentioned, I don't want to leave people hanging about the circadian rhythms, and that it's not just, you can't just do this and keep drinking your handle of Tito's at night. Like you got to make some changes, and one of them is about the blue light. Will you talk about that real quick?
Yeah, so and I'm glad that almost everybody mentioned about the effect of sleep. And this is so true that this treatment, the first impact before you normalize your EEG or brain waves is the impact on your melatonin excretion. So we know that the first 5 sessions usually give you the biggest impact on your sleep. And that's how I joke with people. If you know how to sleep, you don't need to come, okay, to find a way to sleep. But then now we found that the circadian rhythm can be totally disturbed, just like your back to our ancestors, 100,000 or maybe 2 million years ago. Our ancestors all work as diurnal animals, right? We hunt and gather in the morning, and in the evening, when the lights off, and then we cannot work anymore. So that the good example is I'm working on this data sets. My mentor from NYU collected from 1970s from Cuba. Now, if I compare any one of you with this data sets we collected in 1970s from Cuba, I would say 80% of the time you're abnormal, because all of you are in lack of sleep. Okay, so this is the basically a social problem that affects our current mental health issues. So I know that we set up a right brain condition and then teach them how to normalize their circadian rhythm, so that if you can do that, and 80% of the job is done already.
Thank you. So that was what everyone was talking about. That's something that's taught, and it's part of the protocol for all the patients as they're going through it. But Dr. Jin, I want to talk a little bit about, I'm sure everyone here is blown away, as I am, aren't you? Isn't it? It's incredible. What's the barriers? Why isn't it this on every street corner?
Medical community, which I appreciate in this country, that we will set up this very strict regulatory system, which we call the FDA. That anything, because the inventors are everywhere, right? And it's usually it's money driven, so that you have good things and bad things everywhere. So how do we really get good things to our people, so that they have such a mechanism run by Federal Drug Administrator, so that now we are the sort of like a middle of the development, and we're waiting for US FDA clearance for this, so that while you're listening to this, our large team working behind me is submitting for FDA clearance. So that's a number one barrier that take money, take time, take a whole lot of things to get FDA clearance. Oh, by the way, FDA only regulate me, not regulate Jeff. Because he is on the application side. He is a clinician and supervised by our licensed doctor. Or they can do anything they want, because a doctor, their license allow them to do everything. This is called off-label practice. But me, I cannot push this type of thing, saying claiming anything. So that we're still doing clinical trial. For example, we're working with the Yale, we're working with the Mayo Clinic, and the U.S. Air Force. We're doing all these things to get a FDA clearance. So that's number one. Number two, because we're so customized to this institutional payers, so people are not used to out-of-pocket kind of a treatment, so that you need to have insurance coverage. So how to get insurance coverage itself takes a whole lot of work. First of all, you need the FDA, usually. And second, you need to have a state medical board to endorse you. And then third, that need to make sense financially to the insurance company to cover you. So those are the ones that we're currently working on. For example, we want to tell insurance, hey, what if, I only charge you 80% of your normally charged for this group of people? And this is called capitational model. And if that works, so they said, oh, that's great. So currently we're working with one of the large insurance company to see if they can accept that model. So those are the main barrier. Of course, we also need events like this to get public awareness. If we have more word of mouth out there, and eventually more people will get benefit from.
Right. And one of the issues I know that came up in some of the conversations, at least with insurance companies, is that they make a lot of money off of psychiatry and prescribing medication. And if there was something out there that can heal things, that takes away a big revenue stream. It's unfortunate, but that's just what we're seeing.
That's so true. When Dr. Judy Kosman and I, we tried to get this congressional bills several years ago. We traveled to Washington, D.C., right? And then several lobbyists and working with us. And then one of the high-ranked former federal government office just told us, it said, hey, Jin, watch out. You're stepping on somebobody's toes. It said, your plane may crash and your train may derail. And that's how, fortunately, we work with a lot of Navy SEAL people. We save about 600 lives from the Navy SEAL. They go, F them, we'll protect you.
I love that. Thank God. You're doing a lot in Reno. In fact, you just moved to Reno. We're very excited to have you here. And you guys did something really cool with, now this is not an insurance company thing, this is a federal fund thing, but you were able to put together a pilot program with Washoe County. And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, first of all, this is my first day to be a Reno resident. That will credit to Mike, who sat in the front. And then several months ago, he convinced me, he said, I guarantee you, if you move to Reno, you'll get a free house. I calculated I probably will pay $2.5 million for a new house. And the program that we currently work with through EPIC is a federal grant that through Washoe County, and it's a test, it's a trial type of treatment. So we're very proud with our colleagues and then doing this. That this is the grant that Dr. Judy Kosman worked a whole lot on that, and she enabled this mechanism of actions through our charity group that contracted with the Washoe County and deal with a whole lot of difficult cases as Mike described. And so far, we've treated a handful of people. They're almost 100% responded well.
Amazing. Amazing. That's right here in Washoe County. That's amazing. One quick question. A lot of times in our lives and our careers, we don't get to see the full impact of what we're doing and the lives that we're touching. How do you feel when you hear all these stories?
Well, that's so interesting. And so back, I would say 17 years ago, and I was in 50s. So I talked to my students. I said, all right, I'm going to set up a clinic. I only want to help one family. And I noticed that now we have a 6 family. One family, if I can help, I can comfortably tell my parents that I did something and I want to get retired. Because I'm sick. I was sick of psychiatry. I don't think that we were doing anything. And so the first family responded very well, only in 5 days. I go, no, that doesn't count. And so we do the second, and it's still that quick. So I go, okay, I changed my mind. I will go by 10. Now, 20,000 passed. And then probably more than 15,000 of people will say the same word. So that you remind me my early work, but I'm not surprised because I have a lot of people saying the same thing.
You are totally a gift to all of these people and our city and so many people that we're going to help getting the word out because we just want to see this grow.
Yeah, I feel so pumped up coming here, so I decided to come back to work again, so I don't retire anymore.
We have several people here from EPIC. Will you guys stand, please, and let us acknowledge you? Judy, that includes you too.
Judy was the one. So let me comment on something. The guy in the black, he is the founder, and Judy was the reason why he was here. And I think it'll be very valuable if we can ask him to say something.
I would love, are you talking about Jordan?
Jordan.
Jordan, will you come up?
Can you come up here? Oh, you'll my
That's
seat.
very funny. 'Cause I mentioned, Jordan, I mentioned you to Katie and she said, Jordan said he's not going to be speaking. Surprise. Do we have a special question for him or just, what do you want to, yeah, just share with us, Jordan, what you guys,
I want you to sit there. Go ahead.
I mean, I've seen it firsthand. You've shown me videos, you've helped my family. I've watched how you have stayed in touch with some of your patients because we're friends on Facebook. And I've watched just the massive impact that you had. And if you want to, if we have a couple minutes left, if you want to tell us, share us your story because you're so open about sharing it. And it was what made my daughter being willing to do it was you sharing your story.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Like I said, I had no clue I was going to be up here. I had a troubled childhood and I sunk into addiction at a very, very early age. Was into skateboarding and doing all this stuff in Orange County, and followed that into getting in trouble with the law. And I worked in the entertainment industry for a long time, doing nightclubs, and that didn't help with my addiction to where I got out of control. I was a mess, a full-blown mess, and I met that man through a mutual friend, and they offered me the treatment, and this is back in Newport Beach. And 3 days later, it changed my life. My sobriety date is September 2nd, 2013. That was my third treatment. But yeah, I was definitely willing for a change. Like she was sharing earlier, I tried the AA, church, everything, which I still, practice a lot of that today. But my brain wasn't on my side. It wasn't working properly. I think Jen said I had a lot of anxiety when he looked at my first EEG. It was a long time ago, and he said, "Well, we can fix that," and that's what they did. And then for the first time in my life, I was able to access all the things I had learned and actually use it. So my brain was finally on my side, and once I was able to get some days together and get some clarity, after that third treatment, I was able to read. My dyslexia just kind of went away, and I read my first book cover to cover at 33 years old. Wow. And so that was what I knew there was a change. I didn't think I would continue on the sober path. I wanted to, but it just didn't seem, I literally thought I would break their machine. I was a mess. I told them that, and I'm like, how could this work for me? This works for these kids with autism, but it's not going to work for me. And they definitely proved me wrong. And you can't have something like that impact you and not want to be a part of it. And I was so grateful that I was able to work with them and just learn all the different things. And I just want to be a servant and help others.
And now you're the founder of Epic with a couple partners, right?
Yes, with some amazing partners.
Yes.
So.
Well, thank you so much for what you're doing for this community. Thank you, all of you. Can we give a round of applause to everyone at Epic and